Alistair Finch believed the world was a machine made of levers and gears, and that money was the only hand strong enough to operate it. He thought of this as he strode through the lobby of the Pinnacle, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the floor of imported Italian marble. The soundlessness of his own arrival pleased him. It was a testament to a world engineered for his comfort, a world that bent itself into silence and deference around his presence. The lobby was less a room and more a monument to capital. It was a vast, cold space, where the air itself seemed filtered through money, smelling faintly of expensive leather and the clean, sterile scent of ambition. Crystal chandeliers hung from the cavernous ceiling like frozen explosions of light, their facets throwing cold, sharp stars across walls of polished granite. The light they cast was bright but without warmth, a clinical glare that gleamed on every surface, turning the lobby into a palace of ice. For Alistair, it was perfect. It was a reflection of his own soul. He paused, his gaze sweeping the area with the bored indifference of a king surveying his throne room. A lesser man might have felt awe. Alistair felt only a dull sense of ownership. He was a major tenant, a name that commanded respect even in a building populated by a pantheon of finance gods. His apartment, a triplex penthouse that scraped the clouds, was merely the most visible symbol of his dominion. The real power was in the tremor his name sent through the market, the way CEOs paled when his firm acquired a stake in their company. Alistair's eyes, the color of a winter sky, settled on a woman near the grand entrance. She was on her hands and knees, a small gray smudge against the lobby's opulent canvas. Her uniform, a drab shade of charcoal, was worn at the elbows and cuffs, but immaculately clean. She moved with a slow, methodical grace, her hand polishing a small, unassuming bronze plaque set low on the wall. She was a part of the machinery, one of the invisible gears that made his world turn smoothly. He barely registered her as a person. She was a function, a task, a presence as unremarkable as the hushed ventilation system. This woman was Elena Vance. To Alistair, she was nothing. In reality, she was everything. Elena felt the cold of the marble seep through the thin fabric of her trousers, a familiar chill that no longer bothered her. She had come to know this building not as its residents did, as a symbol of status and victory, but as a living, breathing entity. She knew the sigh of the elevators, the specific hum of the lights in the east corridor, the way the morning sun caught the dust motes dancing in the atrium. She felt the building's moods, its quiet moments, and its frantic rushes. It was her sanctuary and her burden, the last great piece of the man she had loved. Her husband, Michael, had designed and built the Pinnacle. It was to be his masterpiece, a testament to creating beauty that reached for the heavens. He had poured his life into its steel bones and glass skin. She still saw him in the elegant sweep of the main staircase, heard his laugh in the echo of the grand hall. Working here, even in this humble capacity, was her way of keeping his memory alive, of touching the last thing he had touched. It was a secret penance, a quiet vigil no one else understood. She finished polishing the small plaque. It bore a simple dedication, one that every resident and visitor ignored. For MV and our Lily, the sky is your home now. Her fingers, chapped and sore from years of cleaning chemicals, traced the name Lily. A wave of sorrow, as vast and cold as the ocean, washed over her. It was an old grief, a wound that had scarred over but never truly healed. It was the private, jagged stone upon which her quiet life was built. She blinked, pushing the feeling down into the deep well where she kept all her pain. and moved to wipe down the base of a towering ficus tree. Alistair was thinking of his shoes. They were handmade, bespoke, a masterpiece of English craftsmanship that had cost more than the yearly salary of the woman now wiping dust a few feet away. He admired the deep, liquid gleam of the cordovan leather. They were a statement. They said he had arrived, that he had walked so far from the dirt-floored shack of his childhood that the memory was little more than a bad dream. His entire life was a crusade against that memory, against the shame of worn-out souls and the gnawing hunger of poverty. Wealth was his armor, his fortress, his religion. He checked the diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist. His driver was 2 minutes late. A fissure of irritation cracked through his placid contempt. Punctuality was a tenet of his world. It was a form of respect, and he demanded it from everyone, from his board of directors to the man who drove his car. The delay felt like a personal affront, a small tear in the fabric of the perfect control he had woven around himself. 2 other investors, younger men who orbited him like eager moons, stood nearby, laughing at some vapid joke. They were sycophants, but useful ones. Their fawning admiration was a mirror in which Alistair liked to see his own power reflected. Noticing his annoyance, one of them, a man named Sterling, ceased his laughter. "Everything all right, Mr. Finch?" Sterling asked, his voice slick with concern. "The car is late," Alistair said, his tone flat and cold as a slab of granite. The statement was an indictment. It implied a failure in the universe that would need to be corrected. It was then that his gaze fell upon Elena again. She was working near a large ceramic planter, her movements slow and unobtrusive. An idea, cruel and casual, bloomed in the bored, irritated corner of his mind. He wanted to demonstrate something to Sterling and the other man, a lesson in power, a lesson in how the world truly worked for men like them. He took a deliberate step, his heel catching the lip of the planter. He made a small, theatrical show of stumbling, then looked down at his shoe. A faint, barely perceptible smudge of dirt now marred the perfect mirror-like finish of the leather. It was a tiny imperfection, a flaw in his otherwise flawless presentation. He looked up, his cold eyes locking onto Elena. "You!" he called out, his voice cutting through the hushed ambiance of the lobby. It was not a request. It was a summons. Elena straightened up, her rag held in one hand. She looked at the towering, impeccably dressed man, his face a mask of bored arrogance. A small knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. In her years working here, she had perfected the art of invisibility. To be seen, to be singled out, felt like a violation. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her voice quiet and respectful. Alistair gestured to his shoe with a flick of his wrist. "You see this? Filth, on a $5,000 shoe." He let the price hang in the air, a piece of casual brutality meant to awe and intimidate. The 2 younger investors smirked, recognizing the overture to a cruel game. Alistair's mind was a cold, calculating engine. He saw the woman's worn face, the weary deference in her eyes. She was a symbol of the world he had conquered, the world of the powerless, the anonymous, the dirt under the fingernails of the elite. Humiliating her was like reinforcing the walls of his fortress, proving to himself and to his audience that he was the master and everyone else was merely staff. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and withdrew a money clip fashioned from a sliver of platinum. He peeled off a single, crisp $100 bill. The gesture was slow, deliberate, a performance for the small crowd that was beginning to gather. Residents pausing on their way out, guests waiting for valets, they all stopped, their curiosity piqued by the burgeoning drama. He held the bill between his thumb and forefinger. "I have a proposition for you," Alistair announced, his voice carrying across the marble expanse. He was enjoying this now. The delay of his car was forgotten, replaced by the thrill of this petty, public display of dominance. "A little game." Elena stood frozen, the rag clutched in her hand like a small white flag of surrender. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The air grew thick with a mixture of pity and cruel anticipation. The lobby, her sanctuary, had suddenly become a stage, and she was the unwilling star of a humiliating play. "I'll give you this," Alistair said, fluttering the bill. $100, a nice tip for a simple task. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence stretch. "Get on your knees," he commanded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "And polish my shoe, not with your rag, with your sleeve." A collective gasp, sharp and audible, rippled through the onlookers. The cruelty of the demand was breathtaking in its audacity. Sterling and his friend chuckled, their laughter sounding loud and obscene in the tense silence. It was the laughter of men who had never known a moment of real hardship, who saw the world as their personal playground. Alistair's smile was as thin as a paper cut. He was watching her, waiting for the inevitable submission. He had seen it 1,000 times. People buckled, people broke. For $100, for 1,000, for the right price, they would do anything. Dignity, he believed, was just a luxury the poor could not afford. Elena looked from the $100 bill to Alistair Finch's face. She saw the sneer, the absolute certainty in his cold eyes. She saw a man so insulated by his wealth that he had lost all connection to his own humanity. He wasn't seeing a person. He was seeing an object, a prop for his own ego. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The deep well of sorrow, the years of quiet grief and patient endurance, suddenly solidified. The pain did not vanish, but it transformed. It became a column of steel running up her spine. The humble cleaning lady, the invisible gear in the great machine, vanished. In her place stood Elena Vance, the woman who owned the very ground on which this arrogant fool stood. Her expression did not change, but the light in her eyes did. The weary resignation was gone, replaced by a clear, cold fire that matched the glint of the chandeliers above. It was the look of a queen who had been mistaken for a peasant. She did not kneel. She took a single, slow step forward, straightened her back, and looked Alistair Finch directly in the eye. The difference in their height was considerable, yet suddenly she seemed to be the one looking down. "That will not be necessary, Mr. Finch," she said. Her voice was no longer quiet. It was low, firm, and carried an authority that stunned the lobby into absolute silence. Alistair's smirk faltered. He had expected tears, or pleading, or immediate fawning compliance. This quiet, unyielding defiance was not part of the script. It was an error in the code of his world. "I don't think you understand," he began, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "This is a generous offer." "I understand perfectly," Elena interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You, however, clearly do not." From the pocket of her worn trousers, she withdrew a small, battered flip phone. It was an ancient piece of technology, a relic in this temple of the modern world. The contrast between her simple device and Alistair's diamond-studded watch was stark. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She flipped it open with a practiced flick of her thumb and dialed a single number from memory. She held the phone to her ear, her gaze never leaving Alistair's face. The entire lobby held its breath. "Thompson," she said into the phone, her voice ringing with command. It's Elena. Please come down to the lobby immediately. We have a tenant who needs to be reminded of the building's code of conduct regarding the treatment of staff. Alistair's confusion curdled into rage. Who did this woman think she was? Calling the building manager on him? Him? He was about to unleash a torrent of threats, to have her fired, to ensure she never worked in this city again, when a new figure appeared. Mr. Thompson, the building manager, came hurrying out of a side office. He was a stern man in his late 60s, with a ramrod-straight posture and a face that looked as if it had been carved from oak. He was a fixture of the pinnacle, a man who commanded respect through his quiet efficiency and unwavering professionalism. Alistair prepared to dress the man down, to put him in his place alongside the cleaning woman. But Thompson's eyes were not on him. They were fixed on Elena, and his expression was one of profound and urgent concern. He rushed to her side, completely ignoring the billionaire standing before him. "Madam Vance," Thompson said, his voice laced with deference that bordered on reverence. "Is there a problem? Is this man bothering you?" The words hit the air and detonated. "Madam Vance." The two words echoed in the cavernous space. Alistair Finch froze, the $100 bill still clutched in his hand. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, stalled. It was like a supercomputer encountering a command it could not process. The world tilted on its axis. The crowd murmured, the sound growing from a whisper to a wave of shocked disbelief. Sterling and the other investor looked as if they had been struck by lightning, their smirks evaporating, replaced by masks of pure horror. They took an instinctive step away from Alistair as if he were suddenly radioactive. Alistair stared at Elena, truly seeing her for the first time. The worn uniform, the chapped hands, the sorrow in her eyes. He saw it all, but the context had been shattered and reassembled into something impossible. Madam Vance? The owner of a cleaning franchise? The wife of the manager? It didn't make sense. Thompson, seeing the utter confusion on Alistair's face, decided to clarify. His voice became formal, edged with an icy fury that Alistair had previously believed only he could muster. "Mr. Finch," Thompson began, his tone a public indictment, "you appear to be operating under a significant misapprehension. You are a tenant in this building, a renter in Penthouse B." He paused, letting the distinction sink in. Tenant. Renter. Words that diminished Alistair's status with surgical precision. "This woman," Thompson continued, gesturing toward Elena with a hand that was utterly steady, "is Elena Vance. She is not a cleaning lady. She is the sole owner of this building. She owns the pinnacle. She owns the ground it is built on, the steel in its frame, and the air rights above it. You are standing in her lobby as her guest, and you have just offered her $100 to clean your shoe." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound and arrogance out of the room. Alistair Finch felt a sensation he had not experienced since he was a small, terrified boy in a dirt-floored shack. He felt the floor give way beneath him. The $100 bill slipped from his numb fingers and fluttered to the marble floor, landing soundlessly beside the faint scuff on his $5,000 shoe. His face, usually a mask of cold control, was now utterly blank with shock. The gears of his world had not just malfunctioned, they had been ripped out and crushed. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. In the world of high finance, perception is reality, and Alistair's reality had just been publicly annihilated. One of the onlookers in the lobby was not just a resident. He was Julian Croft, a rival investor known for his ruthless opportunism and his popular financial news blog. Croft had recorded the entire exchange on his phone, from Alistair's arrogant challenge to Thompson's devastating reveal. Before Alistair had even managed to process the words sole owner, the video was uploaded. It went viral with the speed of a contagion. Titled "Billionaire Bully Tries to Humiliate Landlady," it spread through financial circles, social media, and news outlets like wildfire. The clip was brutal. It showed Alistair in all his sneering glory, his voice dripping with condescension. It showed Elena's quiet dignity, and it showed the climactic moment of revelation, a scene of poetic justice so perfect it seemed scripted. Alistair's world, a fortress built on a reputation of untouchable power, began to crumble in minutes. He was in the middle of a hostile takeover of a major pharmaceutical company, a deal that hinged on his ability to sway a few key, morally minded board members. The deal was his magnum opus, the crowning achievement of his career. His phone began to vibrate incessantly in his pocket. The first call was from his lead negotiator. "Alistair, it's over." The man's voice was panicked. The board saw the video. The family trust that holds the deciding shares just pulled their support. They cited a character clause. The deal is dead. Dead. The word hammered into Alistair's stunned consciousness. Billions of dollars in potential profit, months of relentless work, vanished because of a smudge on a shoe and a moment of casual cruelty. He finally tore his eyes away from Elena and looked around the lobby. The faces of the onlookers were a mixture of shock, contempt, and a kind of grim satisfaction. He was no longer a king in his court. He was a fool in a public square, stripped bare for all to see. His two sycophantic companions had melted back into the crowd, deserting him as quickly as they had once fawned over him. As he stood there, paralyzed by the implosion of his universe, a sleek black car finally pulled up to the curb. His driver, a man he had employed for 10 years and whose name he had never bothered to learn, got out and walked not to the passenger door, but into the lobby. The driver walked straight past Alistair and stopped before Mr. Thompson. "Mr. Thompson," the driver said, his voice clear and steady. "Madam Vance, I apologize for my delay. There was an accident on the bridge." He spoke to them with a warmth and respect Alistair had never once heard from him. Elena gave the driver a small, kind smile. "It is no problem, Arthur. Thank you for letting us know." She knew the driver's name. The small detail was somehow more devastating than the loss of the billion-dollar deal. It was a quiet testament to a world of human connection and decency that he had never even known existed. A world he had actively scorned. His company's board of directors summoned him for an emergency meeting that afternoon. He walked into the boardroom, a place where his word had always been law, to find the 12 members sitting in grim silence. The viral video was playing on a loop on the massive screen behind the chairman's head. They didn't even turn it off. They made him watch his own downfall with them. "The partners in Dubai have pulled out of the Sovereign Wealth Fund," the chairman said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Our stock has plummeted 28% since noon. You have become a liability, Alistair, an existential one." He was stripped of his CEO title and forced into an immediate, unpaid leave of absence. He was escorted from the building, his building, the one with his name on it, by security. As he walked out onto the street, stripped of his power and his purpose, he felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. He had spent his entire life accumulating wealth and power as a shield against humiliation. only to discover that his shield was the very thing that had destroyed him. Days turned into a week. Alistair stayed locked in his penthouse, the silence of the massive apartment a roaring testament to his isolation. He didn't answer calls. He didn't read the news. He just sat, staring out at the city he once thought he owned, feeling like a ghost, haunting the monument to his own failure. He needed to understand. Not the financial ruin, that he understood all too well. He needed to understand the woman. Elena Vance. Why would a woman who owned one of the most valuable properties in the city choose to scrub its floors? The question gnawed at him, an unsolvable riddle that stood at the epicenter of his collapse. Finally, driven by a desperation he had never known, he found her address. It was in a modest, working-class neighborhood across the river, a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. He went there, not in his chauffeured car, but in a taxi, feeling like a foreigner in his own city. He found her in a small, immaculately clean apartment on the third floor of a brick walk-up. The air smelled of lemon polish and freshly laundered linen. When she opened the door and saw him, there was no surprise in her eyes. Only a deep, weary sadness, as if she had been expecting him all along. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice gentle. She was not wearing her uniform, but a simple dress. She looked older, softer, without the institutional drabness of her work clothes. I had to understand," he stammered, the words feeling clumsy and alien in his mouth. He, who had swayed boardrooms with his eloquence, could barely form a sentence. She simply nodded and stepped aside, allowing him into her small living room. It was furnished with simple, well-cared-for pieces. The only hint of wealth was a single, stunning landscape painting on the wall, a masterpiece of light and shadow that seemed out of place, yet perfectly at home. He sat stiffly on the edge of her sofa, a giant in a doll's house. "Why?" he asked, the single word encompassing a universe of confusion. "Why do you work as a cleaner in a building you own?" Elena sat across from him in a worn armchair. "Because it was my husband's," she said simply. "Michael built the Pinnacle. It was his dream. He died during its construction, a faulty crane." She paused, her gaze distant. "When he was gone, all I had left was the building. It felt vast, impersonal, cold. I started cleaning there so I could be close to him, to feel the floors he planned, to see the views he imagined. It was my way of keeping his memory from becoming just another name on a deed." Alistair listened, the story chipping away at the icy shell around his heart. He had assumed her motivations, like everyone's, must be tied to money or power. The concept of acting out of love and grief was foreign territory. Then, his own defenses, shattered as they were, compelled him to confess. He didn't know why, but he needed her, of all people, to know the truth of him. "I grew up poor," he said, the words tasting like ash. "Not just regular poor, dirt floor, one pair of shoes poor. The other children would mock me. They would point at the holes in my soles. I swore I would become so rich, so powerful, that no one could ever humiliate me again, that no one could ever make me feel small." He looked down at his own hands, seeing for the first time not a master of the universe, but a terrified little boy. "The money became a wall," he whispered. "I built it so high I couldn't see over it. Everyone on the other side, they just became part of the landscape. Objects, tools, obstacles. I saw you in that lobby, and I saw a chance to prove I was on the right side of the wall, to kick the dirt back at the boy I used to be." He finally looked up at her, his eyes pleading for an understanding he did not deserve. I am so sorry. Elena listened to his confession, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she was silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. "You speak of shame, Mr. Finch," she said. "Let me tell you about shame." Her gaze drifted to a small, silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of a young girl with bright, laughing eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "That is my daughter, Lily," Elena said, her voice thick with a pain that was still raw, still present. "She died when she was 7. She had a rare congenital heart defect. There was an experimental surgery, a new procedure that could have saved her. But it was expensive. We had insurance, but it wouldn't cover it all. We sold everything we could. We were still short." Alistair felt a cold dread begin to creep up his spine. He didn't know why, but he knew the end of this story would break him in a way financial ruin never could. "We applied for a grant," Elena continued, her eyes fixed on the photograph of her smiling daughter. "From a special fund at the hospital, for compassionate cases. We had the doctors, the surgeon was ready. We just needed the final approval for the funding." She turned her gaze from the photo and looked directly at Alistair. Her eyes were not accusatory. They were filled with a profound, bottomless pity. The application was denied. The administrator of the fund, a very ambitious young man new to the hospital's finance department, rejected it. He wrote in his notes that our family was not a sound investment. He said the chances of success were too low to justify the expense. He made a business decision. Alistair's blood ran cold. The world narrowed to a single pinpoint of unbearable light. He remembered. He remembered the case. A file on his desk, 25 years ago. A name he had barely glanced at. A decision made in a flurry of ambition. A quick stroke of a pen on his climb to the top. He had been proving his fiscal discipline to his new superiors. He had been building his wall. "The administrator's name," Elena said, her voice a quiet, final toll of a bell, "was Alistair Finch. The name of his own victim, the little girl in the photograph, was Lily Vance. The same Lily from the plaque he had seen her polishing. The same Lily whose foundation, he would later learn, was the Pinnacle's primary charitable beneficiary. Alistair Finch did not just fall, he disintegrated. The man he was, the empire he built, the fortune he amassed. It was all built on the ghost of a 7-year-old girl whose life he had weighed and found wanting. The shame he had run from his entire life was nothing compared to the abyss of guilt that now opened up beneath him. He had not just been cruel. His entire existence had been a monument to a sin he had forgotten he'd even committed. He finally understood. His ruin was not a punishment. It was a reckoning. In the weeks that followed, Alistair Finch systematically dismantled his own life. It was not an act of despair, but one of grim, focused penance. He sold the penthouse at the Pinnacle, the art collection, the portfolio of stocks and bonds. He liquidated every asset, every symbol of the hollow man he had been, converting decades of ruthless acquisition into a vast, liquid fortune. He did not do this to win forgiveness. He knew that was impossible. He did it because it was the only thing left to do. The money, once his god, was now nothing more than a tool for atonement. He approached Elena again, not at her apartment, but through Mr. Thompson. He requested a formal meeting. They met in a small, sterile conference room in a downtown law office, a neutral ground for the final transaction of his old life. Alistair looked like a different man. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple, off-the-rack gray one. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a stoop in his shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of his sins. His eyes, once so cold and commanding, were now haunted. He did not sit down. He stood before Elena and placed a single, thick portfolio on the table between them. "I have liquidated everything," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. "It comes to just over $2 billion. I want to use it to create a foundation." Elena watched him, her expression calm and patient. She did not speak, allowing him to complete his confession. "It will be called the Lily Vance Foundation," he continued, the name catching in his throat. "Its sole mission will be to provide funding for life-saving medical procedures for children whose families cannot afford them. No child will ever be turned away. No family will ever be told they are not a sound investment." He pushed the portfolio across the table toward her. "The legal framework is all here. The charter, the endowment, it's all ready." He finally met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no artifice, no shield. There was only raw, desperate sincerity. "I want you to run it," he said. "It's your daughter's legacy. It should be guided by your hand." He took a deep breath. "And I have one condition. I want a job, not on the board, not in a position of power. I want to be an administrator. I want to spend the rest of my life processing the applications. I want to use the skills I acquired through greed to serve this purpose. I want to be the man who says yes." This was his choice, not to wallow in his ruin, but to actively, painfully, and publicly atone for it. It was a grand gesture, born from the deepest, most agonizing corner of his soul. Elena was silent for a long time, her fingers resting on the portfolio that contained the entirety of a man's dismantled life. She could have refused. She could have taken the money and sent him away, left him to his ghosts. That would have been justice. But Elena Vance was not interested in justice. She was interested in grace. She saw in the broken man before her not the monster who had condemned her daughter, but a fellow human being drowning in a pain of his own making, a pain that was, in a strange and terrible way, now inextricably linked to her own. To deny him this path would be an act of vengeance, and vengeance would not bring Lily back. But perhaps, just perhaps, this act of redemption could give her daughter's memory a new and powerful life. "All right, Mr. Finch," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet finality of a verdict. "You can start on Monday." She slid the portfolio back across the table toward him. "You'll need to familiarize yourself with the paperwork. We have a lot of work to do." 5 years passed. The world turned, markets rose and fell, and the story of the billionaire and the cleaning lady faded from the headlines, becoming a kind of urban legend in the high-stakes world of finance. But on the ground floor of the Pinnacle, a quiet revolution had taken place. The vast, cold lobby was still there. The marble still gleamed, but its character had changed. One entire wing had been transformed into the bustling headquarters of the Lily Vance Foundation. Glass walls showcased a space filled not with contemptuous investors, but with dedicated caseworkers, doctors, and families. The air, once sterile and scented with leather, now smelled of coffee and paper and a faint, unmistakable hint of hope. Elena Vance was no longer a ghost in the halls of her own building. She ran the foundation with a quiet, steady hand that had become legendary in the world of philanthropy. She no longer wore a cleaner's uniform, but simple, elegant business attire that did nothing to hide the enduring kindness in her eyes. She moved through the foundation's offices with a purpose that was both gentle and absolute, a moral compass for the entire organization. Alistair Finch was there too. He was grayer now, thinner. He occupied a small, modest office in the back, with no window and a standard-issue desk. He was the Foundation's chief administrator, a title that belied the humble nature of his work. He spent his days poring over financial statements and medical reports, finding ways to stretch the endowment's funds, to approve one more surgery, to save one more child. He never used his first name. To everyone at the Foundation, he was simply Mr. Finch, the quiet, efficient man in the back office. The arrogance was gone, burned away in the crucible of his guilt. In its place was a profound and constant humility. He had lost a world of wealth and power, but he had, in the process, found a sliver of his soul. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elena and Alistair sat at a small table in the lobby's cafe, a space carved out of the area where he had once tried to humiliate her. They did this once a week, a quiet meeting to review the most pressing cases. They were not friends, not in the conventional sense. The chasm of their shared history was too vast for that, but they were partners, bound together by a tragic past and a shared mission for the future. "The case from Ohio," Alistair said, his voice low. "The boy with the undeveloped lung. The costs are higher than projected, but I've moved some funds from the operational reserve. It's approved. The family has been notified." "Good," Elena said, nodding. "Thank you, Alistair." She used his first name now, on rare occasions. Each time it landed on him with the weight of a quiet pardon. On a television screen mounted behind the cafe counter, a local news segment was playing. It was a story celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Lily Vance Foundation. It highlighted their latest success, a young girl, saved by a pioneering heart surgery funded entirely by the foundation, was shown laughing as she ran into her mother's arms. The girl's name was Hope. Alistair watched the screen, his expression unreadable. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of a complex, painful, and overwhelming catharsis. Elena reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had ever touched him voluntarily. The gesture was small, but it was monumental. It was an act of forgiveness so profound it seemed to remake the world around them. The story of Alistair Finch became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, a reminder that true worth was not measured in stock prices or market caps. He had to lose everything he valued to discover what was truly valuable. He had to be publicly broken to be privately remade. And Elena Vance, the woman who had quietly polished a plaque in memory of her lost child, had found that the greatest power was not in ownership or in vengeance. It was in the quiet, radical act of seeing the humanity in her tormentor and offering him not ruin, but a chance at redemption. As they sat there, the afternoon light streamed into the lobby, catching the small bronze plaque near the entrance. It gleamed, no longer an ignored detail, but the acknowledged heart of the entire building. "For MV and our Lily, the sky is your home now." Lily's memory was no longer just a private sorrow. It was a beacon, a foundation, a promise that had saved hundreds of lives and redeemed a single lost soul. In the end, the truest wealth was not the building, but the grace that was finally built inside it.